Why do you need to?
That's the question.
Yes.
See, it's all about asking the right questions, everyone. That's why we're here today.
I'm going to begin. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming. Thanks first of all to my panel. Let me introduce a wonderful panel that have come here today. On my left, we have outstanding TOK student, Masa, and also a superstar from TOK, Arisha. My name is Mr. Burton, and I'm a TOK teacher here at ES Academy. We have another TOK teacher here, Mr. Markovitz, and also the head of English, Ms. Wakefield. Thank you, audience. So this afternoon, we are discussing the 6th prescribed title for May 2025. You guys have still got some time to get working on these. The question is, does acquiring knowledge destroy our sense of wonder? So what I'd like to do is to start by giving some definitions, an analysis of the words in the question. It's the shortest PT, so we can go through the words quite carefully. And then we'll talk about how you would interpret the question. Think about different examples that you can think of acquiring knowledge and why people might think that destroys a sense of wonder. And then we can finish by giving some examples from different areas of knowledge and how it might depend on your different ways of seeing this. So to begin, acquiring knowledge is different from production of knowledge. In TOK, producing knowledge is something that is done at the edge of discovery, new discoveries, new scientific ideas, new historical interpretations, something that is done, production of knowledge by artists, but acquiring knowledge is something that is done by all of us, because we are all learners. So we can think of acquiring knowledge as the process of gaining knowledge that is created or produced by others. What is knowledge? Obviously in TOK, you need to make sure you think about different examples of knowledge. It's easy to think of knowledge as simply facts, but acquiring knowledge can be acquiring skills, knowledge of how to do something as well. It can be acquiring theories that might not be simple as facts. What does it mean to destroy something? Now, you might consider different interpretations of this, but it seems the dictionary is fairly clear that if you destroy something, it's not going to bounce back from that. It's a fairly extreme kind of a word. So destroying our sense of wonder seems like something that is going to be fairly final. It says destroy our sense of wonder. As I mentioned, I think we are all learners, so we can talk about all of our learning experiences and what it feels like to gain or acquire knowledge. And then our sense of wonder. Here's the first word where I really want you to think about what that is. A sense of something. We can have a sense of sight, a sense of sound. Those are natural capabilities we're all born with, but that doesn't mean we can't develop them too. Then we also have things like a sense of humor, which is something more like a refined or cultural sense that we develop. So I wonder, is our sense of humor more like a sense of sight, or maybe something more like a sense of humor? And then finally, wonder. This is a wonderful noun. If something is wonderful, then it is amazing. It's something that is miraculous. If we have a sense of wonder, it could be related to all sorts of different ideas. Some of the most common we think of is curiosity, a sense of awe or amazement, which seems to imply respect or admiration. And there are lots of other words. If you go to a thesaurus, you'll find all sorts of connected words like astonishment and bewilderment, all expressing slightly different feelings and emotions and attitudes. So my question to my panel, we'll start over here if that's okay, Masa, is how would you interpret this question? What is it asking us?
So for the first time I've heard of the question, I thought the answer was yes. Getting knowledge obviously loses our sense of wonder, because if you get knowledge, you lose the opportunity to create something, and then that can conclude up with the loss of sense of wonder. But as I deeply thought about this question, I just noticed it has one side yes, it has one side no, and it can destroy our sense of wonder, but at the same time it can not destroy our sense of wonder depending on the situations you have.
Very well. Thinking about the different wordings there, how would you interpret it, Arisha? What's your interpretation of it?
So when I first heard the question, mine immediately went to no. So I don't think like acquiring knowledge would destroy a sense of wonder, because I feel as like a student and also as a learner, when I'm acquiring different knowledges every single day, my sense of wonder expands and increases, because while yes I might get to know like different math equations or different formulas, I think really understanding like the nuances of it and the intricacies is like what really expands my sense of wonder. And even though at that time I feel like, oh, that's enough acquiring of knowledge, but over the period of my life I actually have that sense of wonder because I keep on adding things onto it through university, through masters, or things even while you doing your job or things like that. So yeah.
Excellent. Thank you. What about you, Mr. Markowitz?
Yeah, I mean, when I first saw the PT, I was shocked by the word destroy, because, as you said, it's so extreme, and as you said, it implies that there's no coming back from it. It's being eliminated forever. So, I mean, the first thing was I had to get past the word destroy. And my first instinct about the question was, since wonder relies on not knowing, I mean, you wonder about things that you don't know, it would make sense, I guess intuitively, that the more knowledge you acquire, the less wonder you have, because the more knowledge you acquire, you're filling in the gap that wonder would take in. But I could never, in my thinking about this, get to the point where I would go so far as to say acquiring knowledge destroys wonder. I could get to lots of places that we could talk about later in the discussion where acquiring knowledge definitely inhibits or discourages wonder. I think there are a lot of cases of that we could talk about. But yeah, that's my initial response.
Cool. What about you, Mr. Ware?
I also kind of got stuck on the word destroy, especially because I think acquisition of knowledge and sense of wonder are so positive in the feelings behind those phrases, while destroy has just such a negative feeling or connotation of the word. And essentially because of that contradiction, I do really feel like this question is asking us to think pretty deeply about the acquisition of knowledge and how it relates to the sense of wonder. And that word destroy kind of makes us want to argue. So I think that that's where, yeah, again, when I read this question, I immediately thought, absolutely not. Yeah.
So it seems like, to sum up from our initial responses, it does make some initial sense, like there's something opposed about knowledge and wonder, but the destroy thing is pushing us away from a simple yes or no answer. We're going to probably oppose the destroy bit, but then kind of find in what way is these things are these opposed.
Just as Ms. Bookbright said, it does, like, it's such a challenging word. So
Yeah.
so I see the question and it makes me want to try to think of cases where I could use the word destroy.
I think too, thinking about the words as verbs, right? So acquire and destroy, I feel like in both senses, you're expanding in some way. So when you're acquiring something, you are expanding, right? Hopefully that knowledge or yourself or whatever it is. But then destruction is also expansive. And so at first I really thought that they were just completely contradictory, and then just in thinking about the two words, there also could be just kind of this like largeness of both of them.
Interesting. Yeah. So when we're thinking about acquiring knowledge, you talked about expanding there as a kind of metaphor for how we picture adding one new piece of knowledge to another. We could think of our brains swelling with all the different things going inside, and so people with lots of knowledge have this huge brain, or our minds, a container full of all these facts that we're adding to it. So expanding is one way of thinking of it. there are loads of different ways of conceiving of how we add knowledge, acquire knowledge. So we might think of the metaphor of building, that we add knowledge, building one piece of knowledge on a previous one, and so it gets taller and taller, but somehow they have foundations, and that metaphor is also quite common. I want to suggest a metaphor that makes some sense of the destroy claim. And this is one example to provoke discussion, and maybe I'd like to hear what examples you can think of where either acquiring knowledge definitely doesn't destroy or does in some way destroy or inhibit our sense of wonder. So the metaphor I thought of was of believing in something and having that belief, imagining it like a balloon that is then popped by a fact. Believing in the tooth fairy until I was told the deadly reality that there is no tooth fairy. And we can imagine in this case, acquiring a certain piece of knowledge somehow destroys a previous belief. And along with that, a sense of wonder that may have gone with it. Now, in that case, the wonder seems to be connected to a mystery about something unknowable or something maybe magical. And this image of science as a kind of something that reveals truth and gets rid of old beliefs could be a destroyer in that way. But that's only one way of perceiving acquiring knowledge. I'd like to ask you either to respond to that metaphor, what you think about that, or to propose an alternative one of what does it feel like to acquire knowledge? What would you compare it to?
So when I first heard the example you put forward, Mr. Barton, I think my immediate reaction was to just kind of like differentiate the different type of wonders. So like the example you used of the tooth fairy is like sort of like the childlike wonder we have about things. Whereas there's, I think, as you grow older, there's more of an intellectual wonder. So I feel like when you have that childlike wonder or that mystery, you feel acquiring knowledge or acquiring a piece of fact like destroys it completely. Whereas when you have more of an intellectual wonder, I guess as teachers or as students, you want to explore different things, and suddenly getting a fact doesn't make you disheartened or doesn't really destroy your awe. Like it makes you want to analyze it more and kind of get into the nuances behind it, or even figure out, oh, where did this story of the tooth fairy come about, you know? So I feel like there's a difference between the two kind of wonders, and I feel like as you mature, as you go through like development phases of your life, that sense of wonder kind of shifts from one form to another.
Right, so in this metaphor, the acquisition of knowledge is shifting our wonder rather than destroying it. It's growing and maturing into a different kind of wonder. Would anyone like to respond to that or build on that at all?
I think about it very similarly to the way Risha just put it. Actually, if I think of like the cherished belief as the balloon and the fact is like the nail, if I have a cherished belief that is popped by a nail, a fact, that's gonna get my wonder into gear in a way that it never would have otherwise. I'm gonna wonder, what is this nail? Where did it come from? Why did it come and attack my cherished belief? So for me, if I have a cherished belief that is somehow threatened by a fact, that increases my wonder.
Yeah, I mean, I think that acquiring knowledge is almost like being inside an infinite library, right? Where you open one book and that leads you to another book, which leads you to another book, which leads you to another book. And so I don't think that acquiring knowledge necessarily can pop anything. I think it can simply lead you to another place. And obviously, I like to use the book metaphor, right? Because you're stepping inside, right, of a different world, which then would lead you to another world, and then another world, and then another world. And it's just the constant exploring. And so it might not lead you to where you originally thought, but there's always going to be more.
Cool. It's almost, yeah, like a journey where you wonder what's the next step, the next place I'm going to be.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, that kind of next place is where you foster more of the sense of wonders,
Mm-hmm.
and then that really proves how getting knowledge can foster our sense of wonder, right?
if we wanted to focus on any particular areas of knowledge, which areas of knowledge would you choose and why?
Psychology, well, human science, law, psychology. I think there are cases in both of those where there have been attempts of a specific kind to propose theories that are, in a sense, designed to inhibit wonder. So there's a philosopher, Dan Dennett, who had a really well-chosen phrase called greedy reductionism. And so reductionism is basically the idea of you take a really complex set of phenomena and you try to explain it in one simple theory. And so I think almost every AOK has examples of this. So if we just start with psychology. So like John Watson, the behaviorist, he wanted to study how to change the way people act. And so his idea was, since people's behavior is the only thing you can observe, you can't observe thoughts, you can't observe feelings, you can't observe any of that, you should ignore all of those things. That the only thing worth examining is what people do, because that's the only thing you can observe. So Watson, with this theory, he actively discouraged people from wondering about things like thoughts and feelings, because he thought they were irrelevant. You can't observe them, you can't do anything with them. And so that was just one attempt in psychology to reduce the whole complex set of people's minds and why they do what they do to just observable behaviors. And I think if we go to other AOKs, we'll find examples of this kind of like reductionism. And I think for me, those are the cases where acquiring knowledge doesn't quite destroy wonder, but it damages it. And sometimes those attempts are very conscious on behalf of the people proposing knowledge. They say, this is the one factor, this is the theory that explains everything, and ignore everything else. Don't wonder about everything else.
Why do we fall in love? Oxytocin.
There
That's
you
the
go.
reductionism.
Exactly.
Next step.
I think of natural sciences because I feel like natural science is like the perfect place where this like prompt kind of has a juxtaposition. So I feel like, you know, obviously acquiring a piece of knowledge is like the earth isn't flat. You know, that kind of destroys our conception or wonder about that completely. Like there is no if or but about it, you know? But at the same time, for instance, something like climate change, which is continuously evolving and continuously changing. So if someone says, oh, climate change isn't real, like there's there's different ways to think about it and different ways to wonder about it still. I feel like it's like a fact that you can't completely eliminate, whereas the other example I gave previously, it's like immediately you can say like, no, like that's not true, you know? So that's how I kind of think of it.
Yeah, so you would veer towards areas of knowledge where you can get contestable theories and
Yeah.
there's a lot to explore.
I personally was thinking of history. Like in Japan, there was two different factions between Chinese medicine and Western medicine in 300 years ago in Edo, which is current Tokyo. And like Chinese studies, Chinese medicine, like acupuncture, those stuff, those are kind of like impractical, and whereas Western medicines are very practical, they're so realistic. And then one day, until like 1700s or so, people strongly believed in Chinese medicine and how they like actually treat was like to drink some weird medicine that they get from their like rolls or somewhere, we don't know. But there was one person who introduced the Western medicine, and that immediately spread, and then that changed our thinking, and then that completely changed the history of medicine in Japan. So we basically started to like believe in Western medicine. We like completely like abandoned those kind of thinking about like in Chinese medicine. Like there's like, you know, in Japan there's still some people who believe in Chinese medicine, and we definitely can get a sense of wonder from Chinese, I believe in Chinese medicine, but at the same time, because of that event where a person who introduced the Western medicine in Japan, some people lost the opportunity to foster their sense of wonder, and then that was an example that I wanted to talk.
That's a really good example. I was wondering if I can't speak on behalf of Chinese culture, but I get the sense that the introduction of Western medicine in China hasn't necessarily worked the way you described it working in Japan, where the introduction of Western medicine in China seems to coexist with traditional Chinese medicine, and I wonder if people can shed more light on this. It seems like in the case of China, maybe it hasn't destroyed wonder, that the two systems can coexist.
In relation to Mr. Markwood's question, I think it depends on conviction. I think religion is a prime example of that. Because of certain beliefs people hold with conviction, makes it so that it doesn't destroy their sense of wonder. Because like nowadays with science and with upgrading technology and different things, you get to know new pieces of information, and through science people are like, oh, because of the Big Bang Theory, because of this, like Earth was created and humankind happened. But there's still people all around the world who, like, I wouldn't say a sense of, like, they have these certain beliefs and certain convictions which they don't let, like, facts from science destroy. So, like, for instance, if I'm wondering about God or heaven or things like that, and suddenly a new fact on the internet or wherever came about how that's not true, like when you die, there's no soul, there's no consciousness, there's no soul. Would that, like, would I let that piece of information destroy my sense of wonder? Maybe not, because of the conviction I hold in these beliefs. So I think it depends on how strongly people feel towards that piece of information. Maybe in China, they knew, like, from before, like, we know how Chinese medicine works. We have this strong connection, this cultural history between us and Chinese medicine. But at the same time, we appreciate how new technological advancements from Western medicine can help us at the same time. So which is allowing, like, people in China to kind of coexist. So yeah.
Is there a tradition in Bangladesh similar to Ayurveda in India?
Yeah, kind of similar. Like, we have, like, herbal medicines and stuff like that.
And would you say it's worked? How has that, the introduction of Western medicine, has it reduced people's wonder about that traditional medicine?
I think has it destroyed people's sense of wonder about, like, traditional medicine? I think it depends on, I don't think it destroyed people's sense of wonder. Speaking personally for me, I think watching Western media and the implementation of things like that, and the fact, like, this, like, stereotypical attitude that Western media, like Western medicine is better for you because there's more science behind it and things like that, has made people shift towards that. So it's not really destroyed my sense of wonder, but it's made me shift my curiosity or my sense of desire to know more towards Western media than to traditional medicine. So I mean, it depends person to person. As I said, like, for instance, people who are older, definitely, like my grandparents or my great grandparents, they have a sense of conviction with traditional medicine that's offered, so they would definitely be more inclined to use them. It's like kind of like an argument I have with my mother. It's like, oh, you should use these traditional things, these have worked. But I'm like, no, I've seen this on the internet, I've seen that on social media or whatever. That's making me let go of certain convictions very easily and shifting my wonder to another thing, if that makes sense.
I'm glad you used the word conviction too, because, like, that's an important variable.
Yeah.
Your level of conviction in the knowledge you've acquired is directly related to what it will do to your sense of wonder. Because the more certain you are, the less wonder you're likely to have.
Yeah, I think it's not straightforward to introduce faith into this PT, but I can see how it can be connected to the sense of wonder. But you'd have to then work out which AOK you're going to bring it in, and that's always the challenge.
Yeah.
If we could look at maybe the arts a little bit?
I was gonna say that I think too, like, the level of conviction that you have about, I guess, the knowledge that you acquire can definitely then contribute to the arts as well. Like, in the US, we were told for years that aliens don't exist. but the amount of science fiction that came out of people questioning that fact, right? That supposed fact, right? Is a lot, right? Science fiction was born because people didn't believe something factual. And so I think that that's like a sense of wonder is a big part of science fiction. It's a big part of, you know, magical realism, of fantasy, of all of these different genres and surrealism, etc. That I think in the arts, it's constantly questioning and adding to and expanding that exploration of the knowledge that you acquire. And to me, sometimes the more knowledge you acquire, the more your world opens up instead of closes. And that's where the arts come in. And I mean, there's tons of, you know, books that question, you know, how medicine works, how food works, right? I think immediately of, I don't know, Harry Potter, right? Chocolate, like, what does chocolate do in Harry Potter? So yeah.
I love that. Yeah, and I think that science fiction is a great example, but it's because it combines knowledge with wonder in a really interesting way. Like
Yeah.
factual knowledge, scientific knowledge, and then wonder about what that means or extrapolating.
Yeah.
And as you say, also like doubting certain narratives
Right.
to create
And
other ones.
I think too, it's also speculative at times, right? So, you know, someone brought up climate change earlier. That is often now a topic of speculative or dystopian fiction because people do wonder about what is going to happen, right, in the future if we don't get this under control, or if, right? There's a lot of variables always, and so the arts sort of deals with that in, I don't know, I think a more maybe childlike way, but also too, I think it's still expansive and sort of still intellectual and emotional all at the same time.
A question just came to mind, like whether it's like literature or another art. I think when authors or musicians are interviewed, particularly authors, I think the interviewer frequently like wants to connect something in the work of literature to the personal life. About the writer. I just want to know about my experience with the text.
I think I guess it depends, right? If you as the audience member can separate the creator from the creation, right? And I think it could absolutely damage or inhibit, but again, I don't know that it necessarily destroys.
No.
Right? Yeah.
Destroys.
Yeah.
It's a tough bar.
Right.
To reach.
Kind of going back to Mr. Margaret said, I think that's a good example I can think of is like recently like of Dune. So like Dune is like, as a series I never really knew about it that much, but when it became a movie and when it became a show and things like that, I started like following it. And it was really cool to me because when I watched it, I realized there's so much parallelism between Dune and Islam. And then when I started researching about it, I found out like the author itself was basing a lot of things about Islam into the Dune, and that didn't. I think it did the opposite of destroying my wonder, or like inhibit my one sense of wonder, because I got even more curious about how he decided to incorporate that, in what way did he decide to incorporate that? Is the consumers being able to notice this connection and these kind of things? So I feel like it really depends, as Ms. Whitewright said, on the person and the consumer, the reader, or the watcher, on how they decide to kind of deal with this acquisition of new knowledge, and if that will let them shift their sense of wonder or not.
One idea within the arts that I've been thinking about a lot with this PT is the theory of romanticism and how much that was seen as a response to certain kinds of knowledge, maybe the reductionistic kinds of knowledge you were talking about before, or technological progress, a reaction towards kind of understanding everything, putting it in a box, and taking away mystery. And one interpretation of Romanticism, German Romanticism or the British Romantic poets as an example, is that they longed for a kind of more natural world. And I think that there's an appeal to that kind of wonder, not knowing everything. Maybe it's almost a regressive kind of tendency to wish for a simpler time when things are childish and mysterious and natural. I don't know if that's the best interpretation of what Romanticism is, but I think of people like William Blake and his songs of innocence and experience, and how like we can think of wonder as being the kind of innocence phase, the child, maybe what you said before, the childish wonder that then develops later. But one way of understanding gaining knowledge is that it's going to kill that innocence in some way.
You used the word that's regressive. I would dispute that it's regressive, because I think wonder is inextricably linked with childhood. It is a childish emotion in the best sense of calling it childish. It comes from innocence. It comes from being inspired by not knowing something. And so yeah, wonder is definitely childlike in the best sense of the word. I wouldn't call that regressive necessarily.
Yeah, I love the way that children will say why
Yeah.
to everything. Like why are we doing this? Why? And that's a great way to be.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, as it, like, personally, I think I have more wonders than when I was a little child, as I have a knowledge of something. Like we've been talking about Sylvia Plath for like a year long, and then knowing her like context, how like her life went, how like she interacted with like men, all of those stuff, like really grows my idea like of like wonders, like why did she do that? Why does she write in this way? Why did she use this author choices? Why did she like use this character to represent her themes? Those kind of stuff I didn't know if I didn't get the knowledge. So I think getting knowledge is really important to really like grow sense of wonders. Yeah.
And actually, a really famous quote.
You used this word this morning in class, be sated.
Yeah.
Then maybe it will destroy our sense of curiosity. But your description of Sylvia Plath's approach suggested that this was something that was like a cycle that was growing and growing. What was I going to ask? Yes, I was going to ask if anyone wanted to pose a different, definite opposite for wonder. Or we can move on.
I thought it was a good one.
That is a good one.
Yeah. I think too, then is the opposite of knowledge acquisition ignorance.
Right, not knowing.
Right, I
Yeah.
don't know. But then isn't also the opposite of knowledge acquisition also sort of apathy?
I don't really think of apathy as like the opposite of wonder, because like as Mr. Barton said, like wonder is like caring about something, but in many ways I feel like it's not, because I feel like as a student in that program, like I'm taking classes from wide range, right? While I'm wondering about different things, maybe like in economics or something, it doesn't mean I care about it, you know? Like there's a lot of things you want to know, but doesn't necessarily mean you're caring about it. So to me, apathy doesn't feel like a great fit for the opposite of it. But I don't know, that's my
No,
opinion.
that's great.
Yeah.
It surprised me before, but I thought I'd mention it because it came up when I was looking it up, and I thought that's an interesting way to take this. The other word that came up that I thought was interesting was cynicism. So to be a cynic is kind of to be somebody who doesn't really believe in things anymore. Maybe we associate cynicism with people who are grumpy, or who think they know everything, or think that there's no value in anything. Would anyone like to comment on that idea?
I think that idea fits
That
more
fits
with
better.
fits more with what I think, because I feel like cynicism is like they're more realistic. They're more like, oh, like obviously this is not gonna happen. You know, like they're more certain of, I feel like, of things, and they don't like to delve into the different realities or the different end results, and they're very certain of something. So I feel like that's a good fit in my mind.
Mr. Markowitz, you suggested that the opposite might be some kind of absolute certainty in some way.
Yeah.
So in that case, maybe it's not whether we acquire knowledge, but our attitude towards that knowledge that matters.
Yeah, and as I think about like examples in AOK, is like the most common, for me, the most common like uniting thing about knowledge that inhibits or destroys wonder is our theories in any AOK that try to explain like the whole range of phenomena in a very simple theory. So I gave the example of behaviorism before, but other examples in history, I was telling Masa when we first came in, like Karl Marx, his theory of history is like the ultimate reductionism. And he said, basically, you want to know how someone is going to behave, mostly what you need to know are their class interests. You need to know about their socioeconomic position. You don't need to know about their beliefs, you don't need to know about their religion, you don't need to wonder about any of that stuff. All that you need to know are their class interests. And so that theory has a lot of explanatory power, but it's incredibly reductive. And if you talk to people who subscribe to that, they will dismiss wonder about anything other than those factors. There are even other examples of, I mean, even, this is related to psychology, but psychiatry even, a psychiatrist might diagnose someone with a mental illness and the patient acquires the explanation that the doctor gives, which is, hey, you're sick because there's something wrong with your brain chemistry. You have some neurotransmitter issue. And so that is true knowledge, but if the patient were to accept that as the whole truth, it wouldn't destroy their wonder, but it would definitely inhibit their wonder about all of the other factors in their history and their thoughts and their feelings that also may have led to their condition. So even knowledge like diagnosis, like mental health diagnosis, can inhibit wonder in a way that's very damaging for that person. Because they accept like a very simplistic reductionist idea. Hey, I'm sick because there's something wrong with my brain, and that's all I need to know. I don't need to think about the aspects of my past that may have led to this. And so there's a lot of reductionism in psychology, in medicine. Yeah.
I disagree with the word inhibit.
Tell me more.
Hopefully it doesn't inhibit, but it has the effect of like, it has like a chilling effect where someone's like, oh, it's just my brain, that's it.
But you see, I don't know, I feel like we're getting into a little bit more of identity in this case, but I think at the same time, I think it can be explanatory, but also freeing and expansive. If you learn something about yourself that you didn't already know, it opens you up to a whole new community of people who maybe have a similar diagnosis, right? And how they get through life in a different way than you. There's so many more doors that opens.
But is wonder one of those doors?
I think it has to be, because now you're wondering, okay, well, how do people like me cope? Right? How do people like me continue? Right? Especially if you're diagnosed with a chronic illness, right? That's never going to go away. People live with this all the time, but how do they keep living? Right? There is that question. There is that, I think, wonder, right? Of what do I do now? Now that I have this knowledge, where do I go from here?
I'd like to ask one more question to the panel, which is about the acquiring knowledge part. So I gave you the idea that we should probably focus on learning, that we're all learners and so we all acquire knowledge. When we're talking about, does acquiring knowledge destroy our sense of wonder? Are we going to put the blame here on the way that learners are, maybe that they are too easily sated, or maybe the way that things are presented, that they're told, these are the facts, you don't need to wonder anymore. Maybe it's about the context or the method of education, or the way in which somebody's told a reductive or reductionist theory. What is it about acquiring knowledge? Where do we put the blame? Is it how we acquire the knowledge that matters? Is it the learner that matters? Is it the teacher?
I put the ultimate blame on the communicator of knowledge, for trying to reduce something so complex. But also I think, I don't blame the acquirer of knowledge, because I think it's, I don't want to generalize about human nature, but I think it's like sort of human nature to, if you can get a simple explanation for something, you're gonna go for a simple explanation. Like, so I don't put that on the acquirers so much, because I think it's not, I think most people, including me, if they can get a really simple explanation for a whole large set of stuff, I think they're gonna go for it. So I put it on the communicator.
I think in this case, I definitely immediately thought of like learning a new language. And when we learn a new language, there isn't like one quick way to do that, right? It's been proven over and over that if you try to just memorize, right, words and just like get all the words all at once, that's not you acquiring, right, knowledge. That's you kind of passively trying to learn, right? And so I think in that case, there's so many factors, right, that go into acquiring a language. And I think all of you can kind of attest that when you are in a country, right, surrounded by people who speak the language you are trying to learn, you can acquire it in a better kind of process. And I think that goes with that sense of wonder. If you are surrounded by people who are constantly wondering and constantly want to know more, then that knowledge acquisition is just part of wonder.
I definitely think it's not the inquirer in the person who's getting the information's fault. So in the way I think of it as, I think about my education system here in America versus the one in Bangladesh. So I feel like, as Mr. Markwood said, sometimes it's the person who's giving the information their fault, but is it their fault if the system is kind of like that way? So I feel like coming here at EF, like I was open to understanding different nuances of knowledge. I think even the concept of TOK and trying to evolve that into different subjects opened my eyes more into seeing and wondering about different things and wondering about how does this play into this? How does TOK play into math? Like these kind of things I never wondered about before. Whereas in Bangladesh, things were more simple cut. Like it's like you memorize this, you write this, and that's how it's done. So I wouldn't really blame my teacher or the person who's communicating that information to me. I wouldn't blame anyone. I was just like, that's the system where they've been taught and they've been learned or they've been surrounded with, which is might have inhibiting your sense of wonder. I wouldn't really using destroy. I think that's pretty extreme. I think that also like, I don't think you can entirely destroy someone's sense of wonder if that person doesn't let you destroy it. So that's one of the other things I was thinking about. And Mr. Barton stole one of the points I was going to say, which was about this satisfaction or state. So one of the things I brought up in class today was like, I feel like your sense of wonder never really ends, because I think the educational system, anywhere you go, is like formed in a way that it's sating or satisfying your sense of wonder to a stage, you know? So first you learn about fractions. That sates your knowledge about like adding halves makes one, you know? But then when you go to 4th grade, you start to learn about mixed fractions. You start to learn about, and then like, you know, like your sense of wonder is increasing while you're getting fed this information that's also making you go like, oh, this makes sense. And then as you move on, like you go to calculus, you go to different more complex things. So I feel like acquiring knowledge never really destroys it, more as I feel like it sates or satisfies your desire to know more.
Has anyone seen, there are some YouTube videos, they're quite popular, I think they might be by Wired, but I can't remember, and they ask questions to 5 different levels of people. So they ask like a child in primary school, and then they ask somebody who's like a teenager studying something, then they ask a graduate student, and then an expert, and then like the international expert. And I wanted to bring that up because I thought this is a really good example where the more complicated the knowledge of the person, the more confused they look. Like, this is a really good question. I'm the world expert on this and I really don't know. And it's like, oh, that's okay. So the child's got this kind of all worked out. And then gradually it gets more and more complex and then you go, yeah, actually this is really complicated.
By the way, if you haven't seen these, you definitely should watch them. They're amazing.
Yeah, they're good.
Yeah.
One idea that connected to what you were saying before about certainty was the idea of like openness and so on. So the way in which information is taught can be taught in a dogmatic way. Arisha said it was because of the system, maybe because of tests. If the tests are set up where you have to know this fact and it's the correct answer, then I guess, yeah, as you said, it makes sense just to stop. When you've got the answer, why carry on? We're all busy and so on. But there is another sense of wonder which is perhaps more existential, philosophical. And I wanted to bring this up, not just because I'm a philosopher by training, but because I think the word does have that connotation. Not to say that you have to talk about philosophy if you take this PT, but there are some very famous uses of the word wonder in a philosophical sense. So both Plato and Aristotle talk about the idea that philosophy begins with wonder. There's a really famous quote, philosophy begins in wonder. We start by wondering, and then from there we go on to do all kinds of science. In those days, science and philosophy were overlapping things, they weren't separated concepts. So I feel like a lot of our understanding, curiosity, wanting to know about the world will never be sated in the same way that philosophical questions are pretty hard to answer. The ones that we have answered and shut down were not really good philosophical questions in the first place. The really big ultimate questions will probably be around forever in some way. And if we answer one, then we'll find a better question to ask. That would be my feeling about philosophy. We're coming towards the end of our time. I wanted to give the panel one last chance. If they'd prepared something they wanted to mention, maybe that didn't happen in the flow of the conversation, you want to raise it now, we'll do that, and then I'll open it up to see if the audience have questions or comments they would like to share.
I didn't prepare this, but I just immediately thought of this when Mr. Markowitz said 100% certainty. So when I heard 100% certainty, my mind immediately flashed back to a concept I learned in chemistry recently, which is like, you would imagine in science everything's 100% certain, But recently my teacher was teaching me uncertainty, and how even like simple thing as the mass of this object has some level of uncertainty, which is kind of weird to think about. It's like when you imagine science and you imagine facts, you imagine weight, you imagine height, you think it's 100% certainty, and that should kill your wonder, right? But then once you start learning about these kind of concepts, inherently in that value of value you get, there's some level of uncertainty that people just don't tell you. But then if you're actually studying about it, you'll realize that almost everything, even in the packaging of food or things like, there is a level of uncertainty in it. So my question is like, isn't science then kind of inherently based on some level of uncertainty or some level of wonder? Yeah.
I would like to answer that, because I think that's a really interesting point. I think that there was perhaps a time, maybe about 100 to 120 years ago, where a lot of scientists would have thought that, what we're doing is we're gradually finding certain truths about the world. We're chipping away at them, and bit by bit we're discovering them. There was a philosophy that went along with that called positivism, where we can have this feeling that, we're making progress, we're getting these advances. And positivism fell away pretty quickly for a couple of, lots of reasons, let's not be reductive. Lots of reasons, but one of them could be because of the First World War, and then there was a moral uncertainty that came about what are we all doing here anyway, blowing each other up. And the other was quantum mechanics, like this feeling of, we've got to the bottom of science, or we thought we had, and it just poses the biggest riddle ever, and every test we do just seems to prove more and more that things are unknowable. Or at least indeterminate in some way. I think those two things kind of put an end to most positivism to some degree.
But I even think of just in math, like with statistics, right? We all watched some of those like happiness curriculum from Yale, and I feel like when the graphs would go up on the board, most students watching had more questions, even though they were kind of projected as here's the reason, here's the facts. Presenting those statistics actually posed more questions, and students wanted to know, well, who was polled, when were they polled, what was going on, right? It raised more questions than answers, and so it could actually even be for maths too.
The one field I wanted to bring up was law, because it's a field that does a lot of things, but actually one of its tasks is to destroy wonder. That's not its original task, but that's what it ends up doing. And there's a famous quote. There used to be a judge on the Supreme Court named Antonin Scalia, very conservative judge, known for his very witty quotes. And he said, somebody asked him in one of his cases, what do you think the point of a lawyer is? And he said, the point of a lawyer is to take all the romance, all the mystery, and all the ambiguity out of human behavior and replace that with universally applicable rules. And what he's saying is true. I mean, whether it's a criminal trial or whether it's a really complicated Supreme Court case, anything involving human beings is incredibly complex, but the judge in the case has to make a decision that reduces all of that complexity into one principle. And of course, decisions can be appealed in law, but when the judges reach a decision, that is one way of kind of closing the book and saying, this issue has been decided, no additional wonder is necessary. And so there's one really famous case that I think is where this quote came from. I won't be too long-winded in describing it, but it was an indigenous group that used the drug peyote, which is illegal. It's a hallucinogenic drug like LSD, and the indigenous group used it as part of their religious ceremony, and a worker got fired for using peyote, and it went all the way to the Supreme Court, where the court had to decide, well, is it okay that he got fired for using an illegal drug, or was that a violation of his religious freedom? And it's incredibly complex case, and all of that ambiguity and mystery got finished when the court decided that no, it wasn't a violation of religious freedom and you can't use that drug. And so Scalia, I think in his opinion, was yeah, I admit what I'm doing is taking a huge complex bunch of human behavior and thinking, and I'm just reducing it to the decision because that's what lawyers have to do. And so to his credit, he admitted that his job was to take all the mystery and wonder out of what human beings do and just say, this is the decision.
But then there are still people who wonder, and cases get appealed, and a different truth comes out. I think of the podcast Serial.
Oh yeah.
Right?
So
Where
court cases or something.
well, so a man was wrongly convicted of murdering someone, and again, there were tons of facts, there's tons of evidence, and essentially the podcasters decided we don't think this is right, and they investigated, and they actually were able to kind of help get this man out of jail. And there are, I don't know the statistics on this, but there are tons of court cases that are constantly overturned. There are tons of laws that are appealed or revoked or, all the time. So,
Love
I don't
that
know.
example. That's really interesting.
And that's super true, but even though and that's a beautiful exception when that happens, but one of the big principles, especially with the Supreme Court, is you stand by what's been decided. So it's a deeply conservative thing where if something has been decided, you adhere to it. You don't question it, especially in the Supreme Court.
So, audience, would you like to ask a question, make a comment? It could be either to the panel in general or to someone in particular. Have a question or an idea they'd like to raise for us.
Right now, Mr. Marcos said that some statements from the code are kind of stated that, oh, this is this and it should not be questioned. But the citizens would still question it. Even though they have been told, no, this is what you have to do, this is how it is supposed to be, people would still have something in their mind about it, whether it's against or whether it's agreeing to it, they still wonder about it and go deeper into thoughts like, why did he do this? Why was it like, why are we supposed to do this in this world and stuff like that?
Yeah, that's very true, and I guess I want to rephrase, it doesn't, those decisions don't really inhibit wonder, because people, especially in a democracy, are always going to debate stuff like that. They're designed to inhibit wonder, in a sense, because they're official decisions. But their intention is to essentially settle a debate.
To stop any further investigation.
Yeah. Of course, people.
We've investigated, and this is the final finding.
Right, exactly. And of course, the appeals happen, and of course, people debate decisions, of course, and that's a beautiful thing when that happens. But I think the intention of the court when they decide that is to be like, all right, we did it. We had our wonder phase, and now we settled it.
So it seems that we, in this example that we finished with in law, certain people have this curiosity about things, and maybe it is a natural sense, maybe it is something that they cultivated, maybe it's something they learned to do in school and they were encouraged to explore. And we've been exploring today a question, and I thank you very much to all of our panel. Thank you to our audience for being here. We're going to finish with that, and we'll end the stream. Thanks, everyone. Thank you so much. Thanks so much for being on the panel. It's great stuff.
Always beautiful.
Coming, everyone. Happy Thanksgiving.
That's not. But what's going to happen is it's going to be replaced by much stronger, because Roe v. Wade was a very flimsy. You reach the right conclusion and a really flimsy.